are clouds, Daddy. Those are chemtrails.
Chemtrails? What are chemtrails?
Chemical trails, Daddy, and they're very bad.
Hi everybody, this is Richard Sachs. Welcome to another episode of GeoEngineering Watch Radio. And really glad to have you all with us. Dane and Russ are both away this week and they'll be back next Saturday. So I brought in a wonderful guest for us to make it a really interesting show. She's been a friend of mine for a long time, Dr. Rima Laibow. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of an introduction to her, but it's only a very short part of her actual background. Rima E. Laibow, MD, is a graduate of Albert Einstein College of Medicine in 1970. She believes passionately in the right of Americans to choose their own health paths. She has practiced drug-free natural medicine for almost 44 years now, I think it is, and seeks the underlying cause of every illness and ailment and treating the root cause instead of the symptoms, as is the usual practice in medicine nowadays. She believes in using nutrients and natural options to find and define and treat the problems that underlie degenerative disease, chronic disease, poor aging, and supporting the immune system and other crucial systems in the body. And she's had remarkable success with a wide assortment of very cataclysmic, serious problems. She's also the founder and past president of Neurotherapy Certification Board, which she helped establish in order to strengthen and develop the field of neurobiofeedback, and which we may hear a little bit about from her today, and bring it into widespread use as a powerful non-toxic tool, for modern medicine. Because of her awareness of the powerful natural non-toxic options available to treat underlying causes of disease, she's focused on maintaining these choices for all Americans. And based on her understanding of the impact of poor nutrition and chemical pesticide toxicity on the declining health of America, she's determined to help Americans maintain the choices that allow them to protect themselves from disease and toxic harm of all kinds, which of course would include what we're getting sprayed on us from the skies right now. She's not only my friend, but the friend of anybody that's interested in freedom and health and in doctors regaining their sanity so that they can actually be helping us again. And I'm really anxious to hear everything that she's got to say about her background leading up to the formation of a group called Natural Solutions Foundation, which is very active now in implementing ways to turn back these programs of harm to our health in every form, and that includes chemtrails or geoengineering. So I want to welcome Dr. Rima Laibow to the show and thank her for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard. It's always a pleasure. I know the work that you've been doing for a long time, and I support and respect it. The work that you're doing on geoengineering is just a part of the care that you have for the environment. You know, I was listening to the introduction or to the material about who I am and what I do, And I was thinking, well, yeah, that was true, but it's not true now, because wherever it says Americans, people from the U.S., it should say all of us. The issues are global. The solutions are global. The threat is global and has been globalized by the globalists into a planetary plan for slaughter. And the chemtrails are just part of that. In, actually 10 years ago, 2004, my husband, General Burt, he is the president of the foundation, Major General Albert N. Stubblebine, and I had a practice of drug-free medicine in suburban New York, about an hour from New York City. And we decided that it was imperative to literally close our practice, and which we love doing. It's joyful to see intractably ill people become radiantly and permanently, durably well. And we sold our house, and we created the Natural Solutions Foundation, our principal website for those people who want to know more about what we're doing, and I hope there'll be lots of them, is www.Dr. Rima, Dr. Rima, Truth, Truth, reports, drrimatruthreports.com. And that kind of says it all. What we do is tell the truth, and then we give people actionable information that they can make a difference, not only in their own lives with, but politically. They can change public policy. They can say, don't you dare enslave me, don't you dare poison me, to the powers that be. And they can recognize the incredibly important fact that they are the powers that be. The powers that say they be, the powers that think they be, the ones that we normally call the powers that be, are actually very weak, and we are actually very strong. So
yeah,
that's
I
the focus.
want to say something about that too, Dr. Rima, because every week on this program we talk about some really terrible things that are going on, and for anybody that's just newly tuning in, we have a huge fleet of jets spraying us with toxic heavy metals and other substances from the air, and it's pretty unbelievable if you're not used to that concept. But that really is what's going on, which Dr. Rima is fully aware of. And one of the reasons that I wanted her to join us today is to explain a little bit about how she sees those things being able to be reversed by us, and some of the background of how her group has had success in turning back other such programs that look like they could never be changed by regular people. So I'm anxious to hear about that.
Everything can be changed by regular people, but the regular people have to do something irregular. That is, they have to take charge of the entire situation. They have to remember where the power comes from, where the authority comes from to oppress and suppress and poison and kill. Well, it comes from us, and if we allow it to happen, then we allow it to happen, and shame on us. Let me give you a very recent example. I am currently living in Chile with General Stubblebine, the president of our foundation, and my husband, not because I decided one day, hey, I think it would be kind of cool to go to Chile, but because the Fukushima episode took place, and among my specialty trainings is environmental medicine. And I said, I know enough about radiation and biology to understand the magnitude of the Fukushima disaster, despite the corporate media lies and despite the government distortion, as in shutting off the radiation detection systems in Canada and the United States, and then the government being able to say, we have no data suggesting harm to human health. Well, yeah, they made sure they didn't have the data, and that's murderously deceitful. So I understand what's going on quite well, and so I said to the other trustees of our foundation, we have to reorganize our priorities. They said, what do you mean? We have a very vigorous political presence through our action items in the United States. We have a large readership that is becoming more and more alert and educated and active. We also have an eco-demonstration project in Central America where we're helping farmers from around the world reclaim the production of clean, unadulterated food. We've attended multiple Codex Alimentarius meetings and alerted the world to the ways in which the food supply of the world is being contaminated. We actually stopped a universal mandatory flu vaccine program in the United States. What do you mean we have to reorganize our priorities? And I said, well, with Fukushima, there will never again be clean food in the Northern Hemisphere. We have to find a place that will allow us to create a commercial-sized food supply and bring it to North America that is both certified organic or better and low radiation. And so we chose Chile for a variety of reasons. And so here we are. And we learned that Chile was about to enter into an international treaty called UPOV 91, which would turn Chile, a very, very productive country agriculturally, into the same agro-disaster that the United States is and give control to the biotech companies. Just the wrong people that you don't want to have control of your food or of anything else. And I said, when is this law acceding to the treaty supposed to be passed? And they said next Tuesday. And this was on a Tuesday. And I said, I want to testify before Congress. They said, you can't do that. First of all, you don't speak Spanish. Second of all, you don't know anybody here. I said, let's make it happen. Well, I testified on Thursday. And I presented a PowerPoint in Spanish, which is sort of interesting because I don't speak Spanish. But I did present it. And then we created an action item of just the kind that we do for every other policy issue that we need to change. We did it in Spanish. And we produced such an onslaught of emails to the Chilean Congress, the Minister of Agriculture, the head of a commission they have here called SAG, which is deeply involved, every governor in Chile, the vice president, on and on and on, every member of the Chilean Congress. We presented such an onslaught of 3 million emails that finally the president of the country, Piñera, said, let's not vote on this during the few remaining weeks of my office. Let's leave it for the next president who comes from the opposing party. And oh, by the way, we also brought down the Minister of Agriculture because we found his conflict of interest. He sells the transgenic seeds and the machinery necessary to harvest them, and so do his parents. And he's now facing criminal charges here in Chile. That was done from our laptops in our home office, period. That's how powerful we, the people, are.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible story, and it certainly could be applied to just about anything. And I'd like you to explain the mechanism that you've got set up on your site for action items and pushback, and explain how that works and how it could be applied to the chemtrails or geoengineering issue.
Absolutely. We have a platform. When you go to drrimatruthreports.com, DRRIMA, truthreports.com, or any one of our other websites, and you put your email address in, you will be added to our general email list, which we never sell or rent or barter or trade. Nobody else will ever get that list, besides, of course, the ubiquitous, the invasive, and unconstitutional NSA. But nobody that we have control over will ever get that list. So the point of being on the email list is that you will receive newsletters from us. And those newsletters have special action items which allow you to read about an issue and to submit a letter, which you can modify. This is not a form letter that you can't change. To submit a letter. When you put your name in and click submit, typically that will be sent to all of the targets that are relevant to you. For example, it would be sent to your congressman, your senators, the president, the head of, let's say, for example, the FDA, the FDA is the Fraud and Death Administration of the United States, the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Creation of the United States, Health and Human Services, Secretary Sebelius, etc. Every governor, every member of, or your governor, your state legislators, we can target them in that way. And then they will receive your letter with the click of one button on your computer screen. We call it riding the freedom mouse. And the multiplicative power, you multiply your power by sending your letter through our platform to as many people as possible, is absolutely astounding. What happens is that everybody who is involved in the decision making is being flooded, not only by your letters, but by everybody else's who's their constituent. And what happens, and we know this from the many, many, many hours that we've spent in Washington and in state capitals talking to decision makers and educating them and scaring them and bullying them a little. What we know is that they don't care what the issue is. What they care is how the mail is running. They care how public opinion is running. And if public opinion is running strongly against adopting this or that measure, then they will not adopt this or that measure. There are two kinds of numbers in public policy battles like this. One is money. We don't have the money and we don't bribe the people. We're not Monsanto. We're not doing lobbying of that scale, and we wouldn't do it if we did have the money. We would do something constructive with the money. The other number, and it's the much more significant number, is people, the number of voices. And the number of voices, believe it or not, terrifies decision makers, terrifies elected officials. They really are afraid of large numbers of informed voters. They are afraid of the primary cycle because they could be knocked out of their primary cycle even if they've been in Congress 20 times, like Henry Waxman. They can be knocked out if one determined voter gets really head up about something and takes that information to the other few voters who will vote in the primary cycle. So there are political vulnerabilities that they know about and it behooves us to know about and to exploit. And then there is the public opinion vulnerability. And then there's the public refusal vulnerability. In 2009, on September 15th, Kathleen Sebelius announced to Congress that without the consent of Congress, the Fraud and Death Administration and the Health and Human Services Department had created and funded a universal mandatory swine flu program where every man, woman, and children in the United States would be vaccinated, starting with those who wanted it. That was a quote from her. So we said, oh no, we are going to self-shelter. You're worried about contagion? Good. When you declare a health emergency, we'll stay home. We'll take nano-silver, which, by the way, is the universal antibiotic, and it is what you want instead of vaccines. There is a site where we know the best nano-silver in the world is available, but, nano-silver is the issue, not colloidal silver. We'll stay home, we'll self-shelter. And in 11 days, 3.5 million people sent this email. And people who were on our mailing list sent it to the people they could reach, their friends, their colleagues, their neighbors. They sent an email with a link and said, here, go here, take this action item. This is really important. Do this right now. And what happened was the onslaught was so tremendous that the United States government in 11 days said, okay, then we won't do that. There you go. And then they of course don't go away. They try something else. They privatized the mandate, which is when hospitals started saying you can't work here unless you've been vaccinated. And schools started saying if you interact with preschoolers, you can't work here unless you've been vaccinated, and so on and so on. Okay, so they came back with another ploy. But the point is that we stopped that potentially cataclysmic mandated vaccine program. Why cataclysmic? All vaccines are bad, but why cataclysmic? Well, because that particular vaccine program had squalene mixed in for the first time in a U.S. vaccine product, and squalene at levels that the United States government holds 2 patents on for the production of irreversible immune-mediated infertility. So every man, woman, and child in the United States would be vaccinated under this program with vaccines that A, were useless, B, were unnecessary, C, were dangerous, and D, contained a substance designed to produce widespread irreversible infertility. And we said, no, don't you dare. Now, how does this pertain to chemtrails? Very, very well.
I'll make one comment in there, Dr. Rima, and then it would be good for you to continue. But 2 things that you said were of particular interest. One is the ability to make the rulers who come up with these programs back off, at least temporarily, and change tack. I think it's at least partially because they're not really ready to be fully exposed at this point. There are incomplete aspects of their program and agenda. They still have questions about the entire power structure's willingness to fully obey murderous orders that they may receive, and they're working on ways to improve that. Until that happens and they're not willing to be fully exposed, then a few million emails like that can be really distressing to them and make them back off what they appear to be doing and try things like privatizing, because if they get people upset at the hospitals, it's not as threatening to them as people upset at the government. So I think right now that's a real vulnerable point that needs to be exploited, and the system that you have set up at Natural Solutions seems very ideal for that. It's well organized, it's well grounded, it's already in progress, and all the listeners to this call and everybody that they know and can contact can use that system immediately. So again, we'll give you details of how to do that before the end. The other thing that's important to realize, and one of the things that I really like about Dr. Rima as a guest, is that she says things very directly that you may have noticed. And I think it's important to do that because one of the weapons being used against us is the weapon of euphemisms in language. Sometimes we have to use those euphemisms in order to talk to people who are carrying out these programs against us. But we have to realize that they are euphemisms. They're not, you don't have to respect them with the aura of authority that they're intended to evoke. They're just tools of the people who are trying to do all these destructive things, and they need to be called what they are. The vaccination program, I've investigated the history of that back many hundreds of years, and I can't see any evidence of any disease ever being prevented by a vaccine, but I can see lots of evidence of diseases being wildly spread and created by the use of vaccines, and I think that's their purpose in addition to causing infertility for population reduction. And I'm sorry if it sounds strange, that's just what I found is actually happening. The other thing I wanted to mention is that all of these apparently diverse problems, such as the issue of forced vaccination and all the health issues that are being forced on people now, the fake health care that is designed to make it impossible for people to get health care and to bankrupt the country. And the spraying of toxic metals from the sky that unfortunately has a name of engineering, which it doesn't deserve, but we have to use in order to talk to people that are perpetrating it or don't understand what's going on. These things are all coming from the same source. So in my mind, it's not a choice of which problem. There's only one problem. And the problem is that these people are, a very tiny number of people are in charge of these things happening on the globe, and their intent is entirely destructive. So one of their primary tools right now is to spray us with viruses, toxic metals, and other things to destroy global weather patterns and to poison the entire biosphere. And this is just one of the most immediate pressing aspects of this one problem, that our freedom and our health are both under siege, which is why our guest is relevant, being from a foundation that's interested in health and freedom. So,
you make a very, very important point. But then again, you usually do, Richard. And as a matter of fact, you were a guest on our 2-hour radio show, the Dr. Rima Truth Reports, this past Thursday, and you made a great many relevant points. One of the things that I want to respond to in what you've just said is that not only is it important to understand their euphemisms, it is critically important to reject their euphemisms. For example, they use the term sustainability as a rationalization for genocide. I think that's a pretty bad idea myself, and I happen to think that any genocide, is unacceptable. I don't care.
Well, Dr. Rima, you have to realize that for basic advertising principles would say that trying to promote genocide, called genocide, would be less successful than trying to call it sustainability, right?
Exactly. So you call it sustainability. You create something called Agenda 21, the Millennium Plan of the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and you make it sound okay for the following things to happen. 1, to underfeed the world's children so that they do not consume more than, and I quote, their fair share of the world's resources, because people who come to full genetic potential are taller and they have more metabolic needs than stunted people. That's one of the things that's okay in sustainability land. The second thing that's okay in sustainability land is to initiate the Common Core curriculum and undereducate people, because well-educated people tend to consume more than their fair share. Excuse me, fair share? What does fair share mean here? More than their fair share of the world's resources, and therefore it's important for children not to learn history or logic or math or the capacity to reason, because then they would tend to be consumers, and we can't
one thing you have to remember about fairness, Dr. Rima, also is that the only entity qualified to determine fairness, fair share, and all of that is obviously government. So the main thing that is unsustainable by this definition is freedom.
Correct. Well, life too, because the animals have to be treated fairly, and so giving animal people rights. There was a great celebration recently in some circles when India gave elephants the rights of humans, and that sounds wonderful, right? Except that what that means is that those rights trump the rights of humans, and under the Agenda 21 program. And what the program sets forth is that the population of the planet must be reduced to 10% of its current level. And that means 90% of the world turns into toxic fertilizer. and the 1% of the population remaining will be compressed into, the 10% will be compressed into 1% of the world's land mass. The rest of the 99% of the world's land mass, I kid you not, read Agenda 21. You can go to our website, www.truthaboutagenda21.com, and download their Agenda 21 program and our free ebook on the topic. So truthaboutagenda21.com. In sustainability land, you will live in a total of 256 square feet. That is your allotment for life. And in that that's about 16 by 16 feet. In that, 26 feet by 26, 16 by 16 meters. In that allotted space, you will live, and you will not have a car. You will have only those possessions that you can put into that 256 square feet, and you will be permitted to travel freely only as far as you can walk or bicycle, because other travel requires a permit. You will be told where you work. You will be told what you do. You will be told what you eat. You will be told, and your food will be limited to that which is produced within a certain radius of your transit village. You will live in a transit village. You will not be permitted to visit the other 99% of the planet ever, because we have to let nature regain its sovereignty there. Of course, the elite will be skiing and mining, even though they tell you that there will be no skiing or mining or holidaying or camping. Or you can be quite sure that the elite will be doing just exactly what they wish to do, and there will certainly be an elite, the neo-aristocratic class, the ruling class. You will be the chemically altered proles, or the technicians and servants, and they will be the only people who are necessary for sustainability. So the jargon then becomes the beautiful picture in your mind, and the reality becomes an intolerably dystopian, oppressive state. Is this a paranoid fantasy? No, it's not. It's their paranoid fantasy. Read Agenda 21, and you will see that behind the lovely words, the jargon, are the hideous realities that cannot be allowed to happen.
Right. Dr. Rima, I want to say one thing about sustainability also as an illustration of how our language is stolen, corrupted, and then used as a tool against us. In the 1960s, I was a very strong environmental advocate, and I actually still am in the real sense. But we were growing food sustainably at the time when the Rio Summit and Agenda 21 did not yet outwardly exist. And sustainability is quite reasonable in its real sense. It means that, for example, when you grow a garden, you don't destroy the soil. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And so something that people were starting to really get behind was taken as an ideal tool by the Agenda 21 people to use and just change the meaning so that it became entirely destructive. And the reason that this also illustrates that health and any chance of getting back freedom have to go together is that in order to follow and really understand these subtle misuses of language as weapons, you have to be very clear mentally to follow this and understand it. And your brain works on the same blood supply as the rest of your body. So you have to have your body detoxified and well-nourished. You have to understand how to do that, and you have to do it in order to make sure you're going to actually be able to still think. One of the primary goals of the people in power in order to implement these destructive programs is to make sure that we're not going to be able to think clearly, and they've already made great progress in that direction, partly through medical drugs, partly through education that confuses people and detaches them from reality, partly from television, other forms of programming, and now very powerfully through the chemtrails or geoengineering, whatever you want to call it, because when you breathe nano-aluminum, it goes right into your brain, and that's not good for our cognitive abilities over the long run, and part of our freedom should be freedom to breathe clean air. So this is why this
Absolutely.
all fits together.
Absolutely. The introduction of fluoride into the water supply, into the toothpaste supply, into the food supply, it is for precisely and totally these purposes. This is not a game they're playing. They want you foggy, they want you compliant, and they want you dead. Now, in order to have control of your freedom, in order to own your own body, you have to be able to make health choices that make sense. One of those is breathing clean air. One of those is having detoxification capabilities and nutrients at high density and clean, unadulterated food. One of the things that the Natural Solutions Foundation has taken upon itself is to find a solution to the international intentional poisoning of the world's food supply. Wow, that lady is crazy. No, Codex Alimentarius is the international organization run by the United Nations, run for the United Nations by the World Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization. They are not your friends. These are the Codex Alimentarius Commission, which I can tell you from having attended many of these meetings and being attended by armed guards at these meetings to keep me away from the delegates. I mean, my husband and I are the only people in the world who are barred from these open meetings, unless we are accompanied by armed guards to create a barrier between us and the delegates. But that's okay. We visit the delegates in their home country. The point is that they are engaged in the intentional poisoning of the world's food supply for suppression, for infertility, and for genocide.
One thing I want to say about that, Rima, and I'm glad you're toning it down to just genocide and, using your usual polite language. People need to learn.
Yeah, I didn't want to offend anybody.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm sure you're not. One thing I really want to encourage all of our listeners and everybody that they interact with to do is to recognize their responsibility as an individual to pursue real education in their own life. Learn what's going on. Learn how to take care of your body. Learn how to not be dependent on the medical system, on the food system, on the energy system. Learn more and more and more what you can do about freedom. And then learn how to stay clear mentally by doing all these things and taking care of your own health so that you will be maximum useful in the effort to turn all these things back and actually stop programs like geoengineering. I also want to give out the phone number in case we have time for a small number of callers, which we might. The call-in number is 718-717-8296, and I would ask you to either mute yourself or remain silent until we call for you, just so that we have time to get to as many people as possible. Again, 718-717-8296, and I'm interested in further description from Dr. Rima about how all these issues are tied together and how the chemtrails or geoengineering issue is part of this overall program.
Well, it takes a whole lot of work to kill that many billion people. People are irritatingly resilient. They develop resistance to viruses that are so expensively engineered to be pandemic and to kill a lot of people, soften in their impact and become less pathogenic. And then people resist vaccines and they don't allow the disease to be spread, and they have immune system capabilities that are not well understood. And gosh, it's hard. You have to pity the poor depopulationists. They work so hard and they have to work a lot harder. So one method might wipe out a particular population, but it's not going to wipe out billions and billions of people with widely diverse genetic capabilities and so on. So, and then there's always the technical failure, like the avian flu fiasco, that turned out not to kill lots and lots of people because the genetically modified avian flu virus actually needs a higher temperature to replicate than it was finding in people's noses. So that didn't work too well. But moving right along, and I could talk about the genetic engineering of potentially pandemic or intended pandemics and the failure so far of SARS and avian flu and swine flu and so on. But eventually they'll get it right, and there'll be something that will kill lots and lots and lots and lots of people. They're working on it hard. Which is why you want nanosilver in your medicine chest. You want essentially a life supply. It lasts a really, really long time. It does not degrade. It sits on your shelf quite happily, and it will save your life and the life of anybody that you care to share it with.
I would really like to support that idea of an emergency medicine cabinet containing things that are not harmful, such as nanosilver instead of antibiotics, that sort of thing. I also want to point out that as far as health threats are concerned, I think it was this week that a new level of widespread awareness of a health threat of geoengineering appeared in the form of plastic snow that was all over YouTube this week, especially a video from Georgia, and that this is really significant. The idea of the geoengineering threat, of course, is that it changes the entire weather patterns, but it also poisons the entire biosphere. And all of us that know about it are pretty familiar with the basic metals in nanoform of aluminum, barium, and strontium that are being dropped on us by the jets now. But there have been persistent reports of many other ingredients that are also in the mix at this time, containing things like viruses and other biologic material. But the reports this week strongly suggested, and I saw some chemical analyses of these materials as well, the existence of strange fibers and plastics combined with living organisms in this fake snow. And that is another step up in immediacy of the threat from the materials falling on us.
There was a lot of shall we say, either naive or intentionally naive back and forth about these wingnuts who thought that snow was being tampered with. I have a real simple question. If snow doesn't melt at 40 degrees, if snow doesn't melt at 42 degrees, then why are we calling it snow? Very simple. So there is, in my mind, no question that this geoengineering of the actual elements that form weather themselves is going on, as well as the particulate matter. I am experimenting with a new technology that was alleged to prevent chemtrails from coalescing. And I said to myself, as I always do, that's very interesting. I hope it's true. I need data. And the best way to get data is to get it yourself. So I acquired the technology, and I am deploying the technology, and it's completely non-toxic and it's completely benign. It's an energetic system. And I am keeping detailed daily logs of the particulate matter in the atmosphere. I am keeping detailed, and this is provided by the government of Chile because pollution's a big issue here, so they track it. And I am providing detailed daily logs, or keeping detailed daily logs of the visibility of chemtrails. Now, there are a couple of possibilities. One is that since I began deploying this technology just coincidentally, the folks who have been heavily chemtrailing Santiago de Chile decided to stop. It's possible. I don't know. The second possibility is that they have chemtrail apparatuses that are not visible, a chemtrail technology that's not visible, so they're deploying it higher or lower or of different materials, and so they're really still deploying chemtrails. I just can't see them. That's possible. Could be. And the third possibility is that they're trying, in their feverish little way, to deploy chemtrails and to make the chemtrail activity continue as it had been for many, many months on a daily, very, very vigorous basis. But they can't do it because the technology that we're experimenting with is actually effective. And what's going to happen is I'll turn off the activity of the technology and continue to track the records and record the information. And then I'll turn it back on again and continue to track it. And I'll go through this cycle several times until I have data that is statistically meaningful. Not just because I want this to be true, and of course I want it to be true, but because I can rely on the fact that it is true. In other words, applying scientific principles of observation and repeatability. Science doesn't depend on popularity, it depends on repeatability. So I will determine whether or not this phenomenon is repeatable. If it is repeatable, then we will deploy this information so that people can deploy the technology all over the world. Don't think for a minute. Let me just make one more point, Richard.
Yeah, go ahead.
Don't think for a minute that this will stop them. But if it puts a nice crimp in their plans and makes it more difficult and they have to go back to the drawing boards, well, I like that. That's cool.
What I was going to say about that, I agree. It's going to be really interesting to see what your data comes up with this technology for fighting the chemtrails. But I also wanted to comment on the whole phenomenon of chemtrails just infiltrating Chile, because I think it's in a very early stage down there and just showing up, more widespread over the city and not just offshore. And what this makes me think of is what kind of an inside deal is being made at or above the levels in government to allow these basic air raids against the people of Chile with the complicit approval of government. And where that leads me is, and of course the same thing is way more far advanced in the U.S., where we're just being totally poisoned and inundated with these toxic materials with the full approval of government, who will not even talk about it. This brings up the question of what could potentially be done to investigate these deeper connections or to bring some kind of legal action against these government entities who are ultimately responsible. And for input on that, I also have the feeling that one of our friends is sitting in the corner, silently recording for your side this show, Rima. That's our friend Ralph Fusatola, the other trustee of Natural Solutions Foundation, who might have some insight on what could potentially be done to bring actual legal action against these higher government entities that are approving all of these programs, including geoengineering, knowing that what they will do to us. Or is there no way to do that because laws like the U.S. laws that I've looked at say that they can do lethal experiments on us whenever they want to, as long as they say it's scientific? So if it's possible to get Ralph's input on that, I'd really like to get it.
I would love that. Ralph Fusatola is a co-trustee of the Natural Solutions Foundation, and he is counsel to the Natural Solutions Foundation, and we rely very, very heavily on his wisdom. Ralph, are you there?
Yes, I am, Dr. Rima. How's my audio?
Your audio is great, and I think this is cool. You're a surprise guest, but the surprise was to you.
Indeed.
Hope you don't mind, Ralph.
I've been listening to the program, and I was recording it for Dr. Rima's use, and having a very good time. And I've been looking at Facebook while I've been listening to you all, and there were a couple of things that I'd like to remind everyone about. That is that, what we've been trying to do as a foundation is make sense of the craziness around us. I mean, genocide sounds like a pretty crazy concept. How do we make sense out of it? How do we take a look at these diverse events, geoengineering, Fukushima radiation, what's happening to the food supply, the toxins in the drugs and vaccines, all of that stuff, and how do we make some sort of sense out of them? And certainly your question to me is the second step after making sense out of it, and that is, what is the remedy? What is the remedy for what is being done to us? Is there any way to get justice against the powers that are arrayed, that want to turn us into the Delta workers of the Brave New World? So that's the question. Currently, there is very little redress in the federal court system for this sort of problem. The federal courts over the past 6 to 8 years, perhaps even a little longer, have made it increasingly difficult for citizens to go before the courts and seek redress. We found that out in the various forced vaccine cases we've been involved in. As you know, there was an attempt to mandate the dangerous swine flu vaccine in 2009. We were involved as a foundation. I was involved as an attorney in the litigation in that area. And while we prevailed, I think, more politically than judicially, because the judges were trying to avoid any involvement in what was going on, even though the lead case from 1903, the lead vaccine case, forced vaccine case, made it clear that if vaccines proved to be dangerous, then the courts would intervene and protect people from mandated vaccines. Well, you know, geoengineering, chemtrails, are really a type of mandated drugging. In that sense, they violate the Helsinki Declaration and bring into play international human rights law. But at this point, with the national security imprimatur on all of this stuff, there is very little we'll ever get the federal courts to do. The solutions are political, not judicial.
I'm not a lawyer, so I am untrammeled by reality in this area, and I am free to have my wild and passionate fantasies about how to secure redress, and I do. And Ralph and I and General Stubblebine have frequent conversations about how we can use the system as it currently exists to protect us instead of allowing it to damage us. One of my thoughts is, if I can show that something that dropped out of the sky, synthetic DNA or a self-assembling nanobot or aluminum or whatever, has invaded my body, especially if it's changed and altered my DNA, if I can prove that, and if there is a legal principle that says that I have an inalienable right to own and therefore control my DNA, then I believe we have a legal front on that, or a legal thrust on that front that, as far as I know, has never been tried. Because we started, I'm sorry?
That's interesting. What you're really saying is that there is, as you've defined it actually, there is a new medical syndrome caused by all this stuff that you've called genome disruption syndrome. These are the genocidal technologies causing the syndrome. And so you're saying this stuff is making me sick, and therefore I have redress against the people who are doing it. And that's a tough question at this stage in American jurisprudence. What does
I'm saying something else, Ralph.
For example,
saying this stuff, not only this stuff is making me sick, I'm saying this stuff has changed my heritage, my genome. This stuff.
You have a property right in your DNA. Certainly, the courts have allowed companies to patent DNA, but does that mean that your own natural DNA is your property? I don't know what the case, if there's any case law on that. It'd be very interesting to
find out. If my natural DNA,
it's actually a copyright issue. It's messing up your ability to copy your DNA
and profit from it. Well, in this case, profit from it through health.
That's what no, the corporations have standing in federal court for whatever they want. individuals are almost always found not to have standing unless there's a
Well, but
strong economic involvement.
Right. I have a strong economic involvement in my DNA.
Interesting.
Recently, the courts held, maybe 6-8 months ago, the courts held that if you patent a gene that you were not involved in altering, then you can't, because that gene belongs to everybody.
Oh, so they don't own genes, but the corporations own novel genes. Is that what it is?
So well, I think you can do it both ways. I do own my genes, and my unique genetic matrix and makeup should be patentable by me and by nobody else. And if you interfere with it, if you corrupt it, then I think that you have damaged my ability to have commercial use. I mean, if I'm sick, I can't work. If I have terminal cancer, I can't earn money from my family. You could do it that way if you wanted, or you could do it on a more philosophical basis. But I think if we put our heads together and got creative, we might be able to find a well-established, either a tort or a commercial principle that says I have an interest in my DNA and you are, without my permission, violating the sanctity of my DNA.
Dr. Rima, I think what you're bringing up makes a really strong contrast that needs to be looked at, and that is that your case is based on logic and on natural God-given rights to yourself and your freedom and everything that's part of you. What Ralph brought up is that national security may be, or the laws that are actually on the books in America that say that lethal experiments can be done on us if it's for science or things like that. And the government wants to say that trumps logic in every case, because after all, what could be more important than national security, which they define for us?
I understand, but one of my observations is that legal systems or legal challenges often triumph when they change the basis of the argument from whatever the state is doing in its own twisted logic that it believes is correct or allowing somebody to do, to another more well-established legal principle. I'm not talking about logic, I'm talking about law.
Okay, and so the question is, what happens when laws are passed and put on the books that are completely immoral, but they're the law?
Well, then there's that. One of the things that I've learned from Ralph, and I'd like him to talk about this, is the difference between what is legal and what is lawful.
Well, it depends on your understanding of legalities. The basic concept there is that there's an underlying natural or common law which governments have no power to violate. And from the American constitutional standpoint, we have the state governments creating the federal government, and therefore they could not give to the federal government more power than they themselves had. And one of the basic powers of a sovereign government, the state governments, is the police power. But the police power itself is limited. It's limited only to those things that affect the public. What you do in private is your own business. And so
right.
in the ancient common law, there was a hierarchy that was built in that gave people a protected zone. And that's that concept. Unfortunately, what Congress adopts is what is legal, if you will. And what the common law has is what is lawful. That's a distinction, and a distinction that impacts our lives in many odd ways. I mean, I can come up with a few arcane legal examples, like the all real estate title in the state of New Jersey descends from the grant of Charles II to the Lord's proprietors. Now, why would you think that's?
We're going to have to continue the discussion when our time resumes, but thank you both for joining us. It's been a great show, and hopefully you'll come back soon to continue. Join us again next Saturday for GeoEngineering Watch Radio, and thanks for being here.